This is the Badger247 podcast with your host, Evan Flood.
What do I always say about basketball recruiting? Don't worry about the state of Wisconsin. You want a state to worry about Minnesota. In-state recruiting does not exist. Sure enough, the last piece of the puzzle to Wisconsin's 2023 recruiting class is from the state of Minnesota, Lakeville North, of all places. You didn't see that one coming. Three-star forward Nolan Winter spurns the home state Gophers, where his father played. He's headed across the border. If Lakeville North sounds familiar, it should. Same school that produced Tyler Wall, same school that produced Nate Reavers. What is it about Lakeville, Minnesota? Has Wisconsin missed in that city? I don't think they have since I've been covering the team. You can look at football, too. I mean, we don't have a huge sample size, but Riley Mahlman's from Lakeville South. I got to ask somebody about that. What is it about Lakeville? There's another one coming in 2024, too. We'll touch on that later. But first, we got to break down this newest commit for Wisconsin. Badgers now have 4 commits in their 2023 recruiting class. Winter joins John Blackwell out of Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and Gus Yalden. Let's just say he's from Appleton. Jack Janicki, a preferred walk-on, also from Minnesota, is in the boat as well. Winter is expected to be the final piece of the puzzle. And let's just start with the impact on this recruiting class. This is a big deal for Wisconsin for a lot of reasons. First, Greg Gard and that staff were in quite a bind. They had Boo Boo Benjamin supposedly supposed to come in last weekend. From everything I heard, they had no desire to take a wing. They needed a big. They tried to get Gus Yalden to reclassify to 2022 and play this season. They were trying that with a bunch of different guys. Desperately searching the transfer portal. Couldn't get a center in there. So to get a 6'10 forward to play next to Gus Yalden and essentially fill out your needs. Bullet dodged if you're Greg Gard. If they did not get Winter, I think they were going to be hurting in this class. Not to say that they couldn't have gotten a good player, but what they needed was a center, or at least somebody with center size. I'm not going to call Winter a center. I think he's more of a stretch forward with some combo forward upside. I think John Lure, Nate Reavers, Andy Van Fleet, somewhere in there. And I know that's a wide spectrum in terms of talent, but I'm talking more skill ability and what they bring to the floor. Kind of a combination of those 3 guys. I've seen Winter quite a bit. First thing, he's going to be, I think, pretty dynamic late in shot clock situations. This is where I kind of compare him to Reavers. I think you put him in that pick and roll with your point guard, get a lot of those kickbacks, or even that Steven Crowl gets at the top of the key. He does that very well. Very good at floating out to the perimeter after he sets a screen and just lets it fly. That's the most natural part of his game. In terms of what he could become, that's where you start with the Lure comparisons. I've seen Winter quite a bit over the last 2 years. I don't think he's going to have anywhere near the same impact that Lure did in his first 2 seasons, especially not as a freshman, but the long-term upside, I think, is similar. Like Lure, Winter's sort of got an unorthodox body. Doesn't necessarily look all that great when he puts it on the ground, but he's a long strider and covers a lot of ground quickly. Like, if you remember Lure, he wasn't a guy that necessarily could play low to the ground or dribbled a ton, but he could get by people because he could glide with that length he had. I think Winter, at least from what I've seen, has shown me some of that ability to just catch at the top of the key, get to the rim in 1 dribble, 2 at the most. And then like Lure, if he can't get all the way to the rim, he can stop, pivot, hit a mid-range jumper, float the ball in, work into jump hook. He's got some tools for sure that make you think he might be the best prospect in this class for Wisconsin. Here's the other thing. I saw Winter in April against what a lot of people think is the number 1, 2, or 3 ranked player in the country in Xavier Booker, who's going to Michigan State. I'm not trying to overhype Winter, but I can with 100% confidence say Winter was the best player on the floor that day. He won that individual matchup by a landslide. Now, there are some factors to consider. Booker's team was coming from a different tournament. Last game on a Sunday of the live period. Kids are probably burnt out. Like I said, came over from a different tournament to play a showcase game. So they weren't invested in this one the way Winter and Howard Pulley were. I get it. But I mean, there were still 10 college coaches in the gym. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan State, Purdue. There were a bunch of schools there. You're not going to be able to tell me those two teams weren't playing, because they were. Winter was absolutely as good as I've ever seen him. Booker couldn't guard him. Booker's worthy of all the 5-star NBA hype he's getting, don't get me wrong. And in no way, if I'm drafting players, am I taking Winter ahead of Booker today. I think that just sort of speaks to the upside in the player he can potentially become, which is a huge mismatch problem at 6'10", and I think his dad's pushing 7 feet too, if I'm not mistaken. His dad's taller. So you look at Winter's lanky frame and go, oh boy. He doesn't even have a post-up game yet, really. He's got a little something. He's got the basics down, but he's not a guy that loves to set up shop on the block and just go to work. That's really not in his arsenal and in his comfort zone. Wisconsin's very good at developing that. He gets that part of his game down, you're talking mismatch nightmare. Got to add a lot of strength, too, and he knows that. Working on his body is going to be a big deal, which is why I don't think you see him have the same impact as a guy like Lure did as a freshman. Lure, a little more built, a little more skilled. But like Winter, I think both can be guys that just get better over a 4-year period. And I do think Winter's got some NBA upside because he's just a baby. You look at him physically, he's a baby deer. I don't want to call him a late bloomer, but I think he's a guy that could take off athletically and physically in a collegiate strength and conditioning program over that time frame. Looking at how Winter complements a guy like Gus Yalden, I like it a lot. I really do. Yalden, a little undersized for the power forward position, 6'7", 6'8". You didn't want him playing center. You just can't have him giving up all that size and length to some of the guys he's going to see in the Big Ten and around the country. Now you got a guy, Winter's not a true center, but he's got center size. So you got a guy that, especially if he's able to add some strength, particularly in the lower body, to be able to stop guys from setting up camp right by the rim. He could be your rim protector. The other part of it, too, is both can pass and both can shoot. Yalden's a very good passer when he's on the block. You pair him like a guy like Winter, who's a floor spacer, probably going to spend a lot more time on the arc than Yalden. I like that inside-out combo. There's always guys that just don't mix together, right? Like Wisconsin had to bring Micah Potter off the bench because he and Nate Reavers didn't coexist all that well, among other things. That wasn't the only issue. But I don't think you have any concern about how those two can play together, especially because Winter's a lot more unselfish. I don't think he has the same, I don't want to say alpha mentality, but he's not a guy that I think goes out and hunts shots. I don't really think either of them are anymore. I would have said that about Yalden early in his career. He had to have the ball, but I think being in the EYBL and playing with so much talent has kind of humbled him and allowed him to tap into other parts of his game. But, if I need a bucket from one of the two, I'm definitely dumping that ball inside to Yalden. The other thing, too, is Yalden's probably ready to play day one. especially if Wisconsin doesn't get Tyler Wall back for that extra season. Who knows? Maybe Winter coming in gives him something to think about. The two never really played together. They know each other, but they never cross paths on the. I should just say it simpler. They never played together in high school, but they are good friends. So I don't know if that has any impact on Wall whatsoever. There's obviously a ton of other factors you got to consider, especially if you're going to ask somebody to go to school for another year, and who knows where he is on his journey in that. And Wall can certainly make a lot of money overseas. But if Tyler Wall were to vacate that power forward spot, Yalden's somebody that can step in and potentially start, if not play a ton of minutes as a freshman, and you don't have to rush Nolan Winter either. With the transfer portal, I don't even know why I bother talking this far ahead. The roster is going to change so much, it's not even worth trying to project a year ahead at this point. But if all things stay the same or close to it, you've already got your guy who's ready to play. You can work Winter in, whether red shirts or not, I don't know. He'll probably be a little bit of a tweener, but from a need standpoint, Wisconsin could use that size. But like I said, physically, I don't know if he's ready or if that'll be too much for him. But you got another big in Yalden who can kind of allow you to take things slow with Winter. So what does this mean in recruiting going forward? Obviously, for all intents and purposes, Wisconsin's done in 2023, barring some unforeseen circumstance. They do have another scholarship available. From everything I've been told, the Badgers are adamant on leaving that open. We can debate on that some other time. I don't know if I have a strong opinion one way or the other. Now, a lot of people would say, well, with the transfer portal, you're losing 2-3 guys a year anyway. Why not use all your scholarships? What do you have to lose? And that's a very valid argument. The other side of the coin is that there's a transfer portal. And you can go get 2 or 3 guys in any given cycle. Like the football program, I think the basketball program has liked, maybe even unexpectedly liked what they've been able to do and might get more aggressive. They made a mistake with bigs. They were too picky this past offseason. I think they know it as well. They needed to get something. And Chris Votes just don't grow on trees. Guys that fill a certain role like that, no ego, fit seamlessly into your program. I think, I don't, you'd have to ask the coaching staff, but I'm guessing that kind of messed with their head a little bit. They talked about Vote a lot in terms of just being perfect. And I don't know how much that impacted some of the guys they passed on, but at the end of the day, they needed to get someone and they didn't. And so now, with an extra scholarship, you can obviously get more aggressive. It's also a loaded 2024 recruiting class, and I mean loaded. Wisconsin may not even have to go outside the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin to fill it. There are other options out there, obviously, but those two states have a lot of talent in them. Again, with the transfer portal, I don't know if that's exactly the way you want to play it. If this were 6-7 years ago, yeah, you bank the scholarship because what you're probably going to get in 2024 is way better than anything you're going to bring in this point at 2023. On the flip side of the coin again, having a scholarship available for the spring signing period isn't a bad thing. You're always looking for players. There are always going to be late bloomers out there. Would you rather have one or have nothing in case something that you can't pass on pops up? So from that perspective, I like saving the scholarship. Because you don't know what you're going to find at these prep schools or sometimes even high schools where guys just have terrific off seasons, come out of nowhere, and turn into high caliber players. So sign your 3 scholarship players in November. Keep looking. If nothing comes, no harm, no foul. If something does, you've got a spot. And a lot of other teams don't, and that may make some of those recruiting battles a lot easier on you because not everyone's going to have a scholarship to throw at a late bloomer. Looking ahead to 2024, Winter's commitment, obviously all your eyes go to what does this mean next in the state of Minnesota? This was a win Wisconsin wasn't supposed to get. Believe me when I tell you, almost all faith in getting Winter was lost in probably late June, early July. They stuck with it, obviously, because it wasn't an overly large recruiting battle. In the end, you knew it was probably coming down to Minnesota or Wisconsin anyway. In terms of what you just did to your rival, you delivered the first punch. Ben Johnson's not going to make things easy on Wisconsin the way his predecessor did. Richard Pitino, Richard. It's Richard, right? Yeah, Richard. Got it confused for a second. Richard Pitino handed Wisconsin a lot of guys by the way he recruited in state. He was late to the punch. In a lot of cases, didn't offer and showed no interest until Wisconsin made a move. Ben Johnson's going to fight tooth and nail for these guys. And Nolan Winter was no exception, without a doubt. Not only does Wisconsin win the first battle, they get to go for legacy. And this was one, like I said, they weren't supposed to win. Does this give you any momentum in that 2024 class where you got 3 offers out there, all of which are guys that have connections to Winter? The most notable one is 2024 wing Jack Robeson out of Lakeville North. Feeder program for Wisconsin now. You can call it that. Once you get 3, I call it a feeder program. Now, Robeson's got 2 AAU teammates, Jackson McAndrew and Daniel Freitag. Both have Wisconsin offers. Freitag and McAndrew are kind of, not that all 3 aren't friends, but those 2 are kind of connected at the hip, whereas Winter and Robeson are sort of the other clique. So now you look at Robeson, who I think Wisconsin was already in really good shape for. And I don't know how this 2024 cycle is going to play out because there's a lot of offers. I think there's 6 between Minnesota and Wisconsin right now, if I'm not mistaken, or 5. Wisconsin's not going to be able to take all of them. So they may have to make some decisions here if all goes according to plan. But as we know with basketball recruiting, don't bank on things going according to plan. But at the same time, you got to take who you can get now and not worry about it. And I think Robeson, in terms of guys who may make the quickest decisions, is up there ahead of some of the other players Wisconsin has offered. And, for my money, I'd probably put it on the Badgers right now. I don't think the 2 were necessarily talking about teaming up together a lot. Those things are always... They are what they are. The kids will talk about them, but at the end of the day, each one's going to go to their favorite school. Nobody's picking a school because your buddy went there. It may help, and in this case, I think it does help Wisconsin, but, they could get a guy like Jack Robeson regardless. I don't think it necessarily would have hurt him if Winter went to Minnesota. Robeson's eyeing an official visit here in the fall, potentially as soon as October. Is it closing time for Wisconsin early? I definitely put it on alert. He's been to campus a ton, on paper. Obviously, there's other reasons to pick a school and a basketball program, but, on paper, Wisconsin's his best offer. If Wisconsin can pull that off, I think there's a potential avalanche effect there in that 2024 recruiting class. All right, now we got to talk Wisconsin, Ohio State. I haven't gotten to a podcast this week. Ran out of time. I am sitting in Akron right now. I'm going to watch Wisconsin commit Colin Dixon at his game. So I got a 2-hour drive on Saturday, but no big deal. Night game, got all day just sitting around anyway. So we're doing this from Ohio. If that makes the podcast any more legit in your eyes, I don't know. But I'm here. Can Wisconsin end this 8-game losing streak to the Buckeyes, pull off an upset at the Horseshoe at night in front of 100,000 fans? I don't know why, but I have a sneaky suspicion Wisconsin might. I'm not going to predict them to win. I just can't. My predictions generally aren't that good anyway, so if you're a Badger fan, you don't want me to predict them to win, because it won't happen. But I think the Badgers are going to put up a real fight. And here's why. I've beaten this horse to death, and I'm going to keep beating it until I look foolish. But right now, I look really smart. So I'm going to tap into this feeling as much as I possibly can because it doesn't happen very often. This passing game, I'm telling you, is ahead of where everyone thinks it is. I think it's going to keep Ohio State on its toes Saturday night. We all know how they're going to defend Wisconsin. They're going to stack the box. They're going to say, Braylon Allen, you're not beating us. Hope you have the athletes on the perimeter to make us pay because more often than not, you don't. Well, now I think Wisconsin's got some athletes. I think they got some real weapons. I'm not saying, they're better than what Ohio State's secondary is. Wisconsin's going to undoubtedly struggle to win those one-on-ones. But I think they have receivers and an offensive style right now under first-year offensive coordinator Bobby Ingram that's going to catch Ohio State by surprise. We've seen it here in spurts throughout non-conference season. They're doing things a little differently. They are allowing Graham Mertz to get easy throwing windows. He's getting rid of that ball. I think, according to Pro Football Focus, he's getting rid of it in about 2.6 seconds. And we're talking about a pro-style offense here where your first second and a half is the drop back. So they're making things really easy on him. Mertz is 5th in the country right now in efficiency rating. He's coming off a career high in efficiency rating. I know it's New Mexico State, but like I said, after the week 1 win over Illinois State, when has he ever controlled games like this from start to finish and been in this much command of the offense? He's continued to do it for 3 weeks now, and I'm sure his confidence is sky high. He's got every reason to have a chip on his shoulder going into this game because he has not performed well against ranked opponents. He's 2-6 against top 25 teams, and those 2 wins came against Iowa and Purdue, who both turned out to be overrated and didn't finish the season in the top 25. His touchdown to interception ratio against ranked teams is something like 4-14. I forgot what I wrote down. If you need complete accuracy, it's in that Mertz article where I touched about what a win against Ohio State could do for his career. Yes, I said Ohio Skate and not Ohio State. You heard it right, but I'm working on a time window and I don't have time to go back and edit it. The other parts where I think Wisconsin can have some sneaky success are those receivers against that secondary. That would give me nightmares if I'm Jim Leonhard because that secondary has not been as good as I thought it was. That's where I've been wrong. I thought they'd be better than last year. And maybe they will be when Alexander Smith gets back, but you don't have them on Saturday. And you got to remember, this is a group that's really playing together for the first time. You're talking about 3 transfer cornerbacks, first year, and a transfer at safety in Kamoy Latu as well. Their other backup safety alongside John Torchios, Preston Zachman, who was shut down last season, played in just 1 game. Torchios only started a handful of games. So these are guys that don't know each other and probably aren't a cohesive unit yet in terms of what they will be come November. Ohio State's always 1 snap away from hitting the big play through the air and on the ground. So Wisconsin's got to be able to limit big plays. We all know that. We've seen it time and time again. But with that new look passing game, what could come is more ball control. We've seen in the last couple of matchups, Wisconsin's defense has played very well for a half, and then the wheels have come off. They've been on the field way too much. Those plays start to stack up, and then it gives way to those big plays. So if Mertz is able to continue to make those big 3rd down throws, maybe not necessarily in the capacity that he has thus far, if he can just get Wisconsin to 35-40%, I think it goes a long way to keeping your defense fresh. The other thing with Ohio State, they don't have necessarily that dominant edge rusher, defensive end that's just unblockable, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Wisconsin's offensive line, for all the knocks on them early in the season, they've been really good as pass blockers. I think Pro Football Focus has them rated as the number 1 pass blocking unit in the country right now. I don't know everything that goes into it because in terms of sacks given up, that's obviously the most important thing. They're not towards the top, but like I said in the last podcast, I think they're the ones breaking down every single snap. So they're obviously seeing a lot of things they like. Not that Ohio State doesn't have a great front. They do once again, and they do some unique wrinkles. Like there's one guy that just stands up and will move throughout the cadence that you got to account for. They're going to be tough to block, but there's no Chase Young, Nick Bosa in terms of a guy that's just going to wreck your entire offense. The other thing, CJ Stroud is a damn good quarterback, maybe the best in the country. He may bail Wisconsin out a little bit. I'm interested to see how Jim Leonard attacks him because he's not necessarily a guy that always takes off and runs when he gets into trouble. And those plays have broken Wisconsin's back a lot in the past against Ohio State. You know, they'll bust through the line. They'll even get their hands on a Justin Fields, JT Barrett, whoever it is, and can't corral him to the ground. And then it's look out because that guy's going to make something big happen with his arm or his feet. Stroud typically is going to throw that football. He's not a guy that takes off and runs a lot. And I wonder how much that impacts Leonard's willingness to sell out against Ohio State's run game as well. Obviously, you got to be disciplined with a lot of the shotgun play action stuff they do. I mean, he'll put that ball right in the running back's gullet and hold it there for a while. But that's going to be more so on the corners to not keep their eyes in the backfield. I wonder if you're the linebackers, can you blitz them more than, say, what Wisconsin did last season against Adrian Martinez, where they were burned time and time again every time they seemed to go after him rather than just let him stand in the pocket and let him throw. Now, Stroud's a much better play diagnoser, smarter quarterback, going to make better decisions. He's very tough to rattle. But unlike Martinez, if the first guy doesn't get to him, I don't know if he kills you. So if you're Leonard, typically you're kind of hesitant to blitz Ohio State. This Saturday, I think you go after him. Hope that Jordan Turner, hope that Muma Njongmeta, hope that Nick Herbig are able to create early pressure. Because like I said, it's not necessarily one and done with him. If the first guy doesn't get him on the ground, it's not play over. He's going to look to throw that ball. One other reason for optimism I'll leave you with before we wrap up this podcast. If you're going to catch Ohio State, you generally need to do it earlier in the season. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 2 of the last 3 wins the Badgers have had in this series have been Big Ten openers. You also got to figure, with the Washington State loss, you're dealing with a Wisconsin team that's probably hungrier, might even sneak up on Ohio State a little bit. Ohio State typically gives Wisconsin its best shot. They haven't had some of these letdown games that they've had against Minnesota, Iowa, Purdue, win or lose, that they just don't look like themselves. They've typically given Wisconsin their best stuff. Maybe that's different this time around, that Wisconsin's 2-1 and has that stunning loss to Washington State. I don't know. But you even look this season opener against Notre Dame. They won 21-10. They were trailing in the second half. And from what we've seen from Notre Dame this season, that's not a very good team. The Irish are a play away from being 0-3 right now. Toledo, I think their running quarterback gave Ohio State problems. That obviously won't be a thing with Wisconsin, but they hung 21 in Columbus last week. Look at 2021. They beat Minnesota 45-31. It turned out to be a Minnesota team that handled Wisconsin in the season finale. The Buckeyes were real sloppy in that one and lost the next week to Oregon at home. And a week later, they gave up 20 to Tulsa. So the last 2 seasons, this is a program that's been a little suspect in September. I know you can't think like this, but if this is a preview of the Big Ten championship game, and we got a long way to go before we get to that point, you don't want to win the first one. You really don't. I'm not trying to heal any early wounds that may take place on Saturday. I just always kind of find that dynamic interesting. Especially if you're Wisconsin, you don't want to win the first. You're not beating them twice in a season. And if you sneak up on them once, you're not sneaking up on them again, right? But we can't even be sure Wisconsin is the favorite in the West at this point. Good enough, talented enough to win it for sure. But like we learned against Washington State. This team's not good enough to have a C, D performance and expect to beat a lot of people. Little margin for error. All right, so I am headed to Aurora, Ohio to watch Wisconsin commit Colin Dixon. Potential 4-star? We'll see. I think the film backs it up. I'll give my thoughts on him next week. I was able to see Wisconsin running back commit Nate White last night, and so for the last word here, I'll talk about his performance. King kind of surprisingly lost to Milwaukee Marshall. 13-0. They kept him in check most of the night. I'm sure a lot of that is King's former assistant coach is now the head coach over there. He knows Nate White and that offense really well. I'm almost positive that had something to do with it. That being said, I'm not all that sure about this commitment for Wisconsin. I've always said I'm going to give it to you straight. I'm not going to overhype people. I'm not going to shove rainbows up your butt and try and get clicks by telling you how great everyone's going to be. The reality is shouldn't say most, but 50% of the players Wisconsin signs aren't going to pan out. I'm never going to rule anybody out, but this one I think is going to be an uphill battle for him depending on how he's used at Wisconsin. White's coming in as a running back. He's not an every down running back in Wisconsin's system. I think I counted 1 carry Thursday night between the tackles. That's not what he does. They want to toss it to him, sweep it to him. Quick stuff in the flats, in the passing game. Get him out in space by any means possible. I do think he could be a lot more successful as a slot wide receiver with what Wisconsin likes to do there. And that's where I'm really interested to see is how does Paul Chryst, Bobby Ingram utilize him in the offense, because he's not your prototypical Wisconsin tailback. Not a guy that puts the pads down, runs between the tackles, falls forward, can get you those tough 4 or 5 yard runs consistently. That's not what he does. Some people will try and compare him to James White or somebody like that. White could be a bell cow despite his size. That's not what White does. I don't want to call him a gadget guy just yet, but that's where I'm kind of leaning. Do you sort of try and use him the way you used Aaron Cruikshank, which I actually was pleasantly surprised Wisconsin worked him in as much as they did. And White does run a wildcat package at King. And, I'd like to see Paul Chryst kind of bring that back with him. I think White, who can throw the ball a little bit too, has got this right skill set for that. Really love the way he sticks his foot in the ground, can change directions at top end speed. I thought junior year film was dancing a lot and kind of just relying on speed. From what I saw Thursday, he's a lot more north-south than I remember. So that was a positive sign. That was my first Milwaukee City Conference game. And the other part that worries me, if I'm White, is the jump in talent level he's going to see is going to be enormous. Because I'm dealing with high school kids, I'm not going to say what I really want to say, but he's going to have a deer in the headlights look when he gets to Madison. I think there's no doubt about it. He just hasn't been around the type of football that is going to be asked of him in the Big Ten and at the Division I level. It's going to be night and day. There's going to be a huge learning curve for him without a doubt. So I'm going to tuck it and run. We'll come back after the Ohio State game. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of takes on that one. Hopefully juicy takes too. I want to find out where this program is. No better way to do that than to take on one of the top 2 or 3, 4 programs in all of college football under the lights. You can follow me on Twitter at Evan_Flood. Also got the YouTube, also got the Instagram. Little different stuff on all those. I mix it up. It's not all the same content. Badgers, Buckeyes, under the lights, 6:30 on ABC. We will check in with you guys after the weekend. Thanks again.